Do you remember what you were doing at 6:30 in the evening on the 22nd of March 2020? No, I don't either. But I know what I was supposed to be doing. I was supposed to be preaching on Revelation chapter 20, but that was our first Sunday online rather than in person, and so Revelation 20 was shelved. And it's been shelved for quite a while now, but I think now is time. So for 22 weeks before that, on Sunday evenings in our church, we'd been going through the book of Revelation, looking at it in a good amount of detail. The book is a letter that is sent to 7 first century churches that were in what is now modern day Turkey, as John addressed issues that those churches were facing. It's also a record of a vision that John was given to reassure those churches and to reassure all Christians ever since. The vision so far has involved John seeing who is in control as Jesus unravels God's plans for history, involving hardships for Christians, but also involving God keeping us. It involves a picture of what is going on behind the scenes as false religion and godless state do all that they can to hinder the true worship of God in the Messiah Jesus. And it shows how God will ultimately eventually deal with all that is set against him in the final judgment. So the whole book is not merely to give us a program of future events, but to explain what we live through as Christians in this age and to assure us that God is going to deal with it eventually. So as we approach Revelation chapter 20, I want to ask you one question to get you thinking. When does Jesus reign? If this chapter wasn't in your Bible, what would your answer be? And I think if you didn't have this chapter in your Bible, your answer would be that he reigns now. He reigns in heaven, and he has been reigning ever since his ascension to heaven. So, for example, Hebrews 8 and 12, they speak about how Jesus is already sat down at the right hand of the Father. Or of 1 Corinthians 15, which links Jesus' resurrection to his present reign as he brings all things under his rule. And then it speaks about how at his return, Jesus will hand over his present reign back to the Father. And there are plenty of other places in the Bible that we could go to as well. Now, the reason for asking that is because there are 3 ways of understanding this chapter. One of those ways understands that the reign of Christ for 1,000 years happens after his return to this earth at some point in the future. The other 2 of those ways, they understand that the reign of Christ happens within this age and then Jesus returns. If you want to find out more about these 3 different views, then there will be a link on Twitter and Facebook that will give you more information about these 3 views. And if you have a particular view on this, that's fine. It's not a major deal breaker. It doesn't compromise the gospel if you take either one of these 3 views. It does, however, change the way you understand this particular chapter of the Bible and its relevance for us today. So I don't accept the idea that Jesus returns first and then there is 1,000 years reign. I think that we need to understand the harder passages in light of the clearer ones. And so for me, because the rest of the Bible seems to speak about Jesus already reigning, I take it that he is reigning now and that he has been reigning since his ascension, and then at some point in the future he will return. So that's my view. If you hold another view, as I've said, that's fine. Much of what I say today will at least have application. Now, the book of Revelation often goes around in circles to repeat the same time period and the same events, but with different emphases each time. Much like how at awards ceremonies, it's the same process each time. You announce the nominations, you open the envelope, you hear the winner's speech, but it's a slightly different award each time. Best actor, best actress, best screenplay, best music, whatever else it is. Same process, different emphasis. So what we have here in Revelation, same process again, slightly different emphasis. We're beginning at the beginning again and doing one final circle. So we're beginning again with the life, death and resurrection of Jesus, that time period. If you've got a really good memory, this chapter parallels chapter 12. Now you may want to read them together and compare them perhaps later on today. So that means it is speaking about what life is like since the time of the resurrection of Jesus. It's talking about us who live in the light of Jesus' saving act. So we'll look at this in two halves. We'll first start with what it says about now, and then we'll look about what it says is still to come. So firstly, for now, the devil is restricted. Now, this is not talking about a physical, literal reality. After all, we're talking about spiritual realms here. Neither is it talking in absolute terms. The devil is still able to harm even though he is restricted. So this binding, it happens as a result of Jesus living perfectly, dying as an innocent, and rising in defeat of death. That's what overcame the devil. Now, whereas in Revelation 12, Satan, his defeat was spoken in terms of being thrown out of access to heaven so that he could no longer accuse God's people, for this chapter it's spoken of him being cast into the abyss and chained to limit him in just one regard, and that is in verse 3. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations any more until the 1,000 years were ended. So his sentence there is spoken of as being for 1,000 years. That's not a literal number any more than the other numbers in Revelation are literal, but it's representing a complete quantity of allotted time, as 10 being the complete number is multiplied 3 times together to make 1,000. Now, the devil's aim now is to overthrow the church. We saw that in Revelation chapter 12 again. But the way that he would do that is by deceiving unbelievers so that they don't believe the good news and they carry out extreme persecution of the church to the point of its defeat. But the devil cannot do that. As he's called here, the snake who first deceived the very first church of Adam and Eve, he has now been limited and unable to deceive any more. That doesn't mean there won't be any persecution or any deception, but that the complete overthrow of the church is impossible. It's in that regard that he is restricted. And in light of that, what we also see for now is that the church will grow. Now imagine that you're a business owner in a shady part of town where the mafia own everything and demand payments so that you can just exist. Now, as a result of that, your business is going to be struggling. But then imagine the scenario that the mafia boss has been arrested and put in jail awaiting trial, and the police are keeping a close eye now on all the other gang members as well. In that scenario, your business is now going to be doing much better because you no longer have to pay off the mob. Now, though, of course, we're not a business, the scenario is similar to the age that we live in as the church. The mafia boss that is the devil, he is in prison. That doesn't mean there are no threats, but those threats are now minimized and the church can thrive in this age. If you just take the UK and if you just take the last 100 years or so, the picture doesn't look so positive. But if you look at the whole period of history, churches have continued to spread. If you take a global picture of what's going on now, faith in Jesus continues to increase. The largest growing church is in Iran. Jesus said that he will build his church and even hell will not overcome it. Finally, for now, deceased Christians will reign. What happens when Christians die? And what we see in the rest of the Bible helps us in understanding what it's talking about here. The answer in the rest of the Bible is that whilst our bodies are laid in the ground, our souls go to be in heaven with Jesus. And our souls wait there with him for him to return and to bring us with him for the new creation. Now, for here, have a look down at verse 4. It speaks there about the souls of those who have died for their faith, and John sees those souls in heaven. And there are also those referred to as those who haven't worshipped the beast. That means that they've been faithful to Jesus rather than trusting in the false hopes of our age. And by the way, when it talks about dying for your faith here, it doesn't mean only those who are martyred go to heaven. After all, to come to Christ and follow him faithfully is to lay down your life as a martyr. But notice what it says at the end of verse 4 and into verses 5 and 6. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who share in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them, but they will be priests of God and of Christ and will reign with him for 1,000 years. So it speaks there about there being two deaths and two resurrections. The first death is where we die in this life. Then there is the first resurrection for the Christian, and that is where their soul is made alive and taken up to heaven immediately upon death, even whilst their body is buried or cremated. So this resurrection, the first resurrection, is a spiritual one. Then there is the second resurrection, and that happens when Jesus comes again. All people who have died, whether Christians or not, will be brought to life again, the second resurrection. But then there's the second death that happens, but it cannot touch the Christian. That second death is the eternal experience of hell, and we'll talk about that more in just a moment. So in the now, for Christians who die experiencing the first death, they experience the first resurrection, which is of their souls. They are taken up to heaven. And even more amazing news is that as Jesus has taken up his reign in heaven, so Christians who die, they join in with his heavenly reign already. That's what the end of verse 6 says, that we will reign with him for this duration of time. Now, the first thing that should do to us is it should be an immense comfort for us whenever another Christian dies, whether it's a family member or a member of our church. They haven't just ceased to exist. They're not just in an unconscious state. They're in heaven with Jesus, waiting for him for his return, and in the meantime reigning with him. Secondly, as well as bringing us comfort, for us who are Christians, it should bring us immense courage whenever we face our own death. We're not tipping over into some unknown darkness. We know exactly what our next moment will be. When we lose consciousness in death, in the very next moment we awake as if from sleep, in the conscious experience of being in heaven with Jesus. That should bring us courage. And if you're not a Christian, then this is on offer to you. If you will come and accept Jesus as your Lord and King, if you will follow him, he will never let the devil and death have the final say with you. Whenever death finally takes you, he will raise you up, keeping you from death's grip, so that it is only a momentary hold that it has on you, and he will take your soul to be with him in heaven. And all this is for now. The devil is restricted, the church continues to grow, the Christian who dies is raised in their soul to heaven to join in the reign of Jesus. But what happens next? Let's look at then. Firstly, for then, the devil will be eliminated. You may have spotted that at the end of verse 3 it speaks about the devil being released for a short period of time. And that's what verse 7 picks up on. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. So if you like, our mafia boss has made bail and is released. And the first thing he does is to do what he always does, causes harm. He comes to your business. He comes with a gang and he comes with weapons. He puts you in a chair. He demands extortionate amounts of cash and he picks up some implement to torture you until you agree to what he says. The devil, as he gets released, he does what he wanted to do all along. He deceives the nations, called here Gog and Magog, picking up on Ezekiel's prophecy. He deceives the nations for one final uprising against God's people, the church. One final battle to get rid of all of God's people once and for all. Now, what exactly that will look like, we can't speculate too much. But if we're still alive when it happens, we will feel threatened. We will feel like we're on our last legs. We will feel like giving up hope. It may be a one-off thing. It may be a culmination of several things all at once. It doesn't help to speculate too much. But whatever it will be, it won't last long. It will be very short. So as you're in the chair with the mafia boss about to harm you, in burst the police. They catch him in the act, meaning that he can be sentenced immediately with no chance of escape. They have all of the evidence they need to put him away for good. And so likewise with the devil, he's caught in the act. As he gives this one final assault on the church, he is caught by Jesus before he even does any real harm. And as verse 10 tells us, he is then in that moment thrown into hell. He will experience the heavy hand of justice and he will experience it without any end. As if that's not enough, his henchmen called the beast and the false prophet, and they're the means that the devil uses in this world of false religion and godless state, they are also incarcerated there. And what's more, in verse 14, even death that the devil has used to oppress us is finally no more. Christians, we should be aware of the devil. We should be aware that he is a very real threat to us. He will do all that he can to oppose our own progress in the faith and our spread of it as well. But his time is limited. One day he will be consigned to hell, where he cannot even threaten us anymore. So if you in this life experience his threats, as we all will at times, remind yourself of his doom. Remind yourself that God is so much greater and more powerful than he is, and one day God will do away with the devil completely, and therefore hold on even when you feel threatened. Finally, for then, all people will be judged. So in verse 11, the throne of God appears, his great white throne. Earth and sky are terrified, and so they run away. But then the second resurrection happens. All who have died are brought back to life. So people who've been buried at sea even are brought to God's throne alongside those who are held in the realm of the dead. And every person is judged. So there's going to be this test at the end of time to see if we are worthy of God's eternal kingdom. Are we worthy of the new perfect earth that Jesus will remake when he returns? The test, as it tells us here, is according to what we have done. Are we good enough? The problem is, if Jesus is going to make the world to be perfect, then the standard of entry is perfection. Anything short of that would ruin the world from being a perfect place. What's worse, the only other option, if we don't make that standard, is to go to the same place as the devil and all else that is in opposition to God. Hell is the only other destination. Now, we had an MOT on the car recently. Before the MOT, I had a bump and smashed the lights. So just in order to get it through the MOT, I bought a replacement light unit and taped up all of the sharp edges from that bump. And then I noticed that some of the bulbs were out on the car. So replaced those and spent a bit of time making sure it was up to scratch. I did all that I could to make the car passable. And yet the judgment happened. The test came about and the car was not up to standard. It failed the test because one of the doors wouldn't open. Now, like with my car, only one small fault can let you down. Though if we're honest, which one of us can say that we only have one small fault? In order to keep the road safe, one small fault rightly excludes your car. In order to keep heaven a perfect place, one small fault can exclude any one person, can exclude you and I. Now, does that mean it's hopeless? No. The books are open that record all of the events of our lives, all of the things that we've failed to do, all of the things that we've done that are just outright wrong. Those are opened. Those record all of our mistakes. But another book is also opened, and that book is the book of life. The book is referred to 4 times in Revelation, and on one of those times it's given its full name, which is the Lamb's Book of Life. That Lamb is Jesus, and he's called a lamb because he is the one who was sacrificed for the sin of all those whose names are in that book. And that's just it. For those who know that Jesus died for them, for those who have put their trust in Jesus' death, who know that it was for their sin that he died, their names are in this book of life. This lamb died so that we could have life. The very last verse tells us that the only way to escape from exclusion with God's kingdom, the exclusion that we deserve, the only way to escape is to have your name written in the book of life. And so it's well worth me asking you right now, do you know that your name is recorded in that book? Do you know that Jesus died for your sin in order that you could receive life? None of us deserve the new perfect earth that is coming. But if we will trust in Jesus, we're given access to it as our free gift. So why is this chapter here in the Bible? Well, it's a warning for any who haven't yet turned to him. It's a challenge to know that your name is recorded in heaven as having received life in Jesus and hope for eternity. Believe in Jesus today, and you can have this assurance. It's also an encouragement for us who do follow him that the devil isn't off the hook. He's currently partially restricted, and he will one day be completely consigned to hell, him and all that he uses in his schemes. He will one day be no more. And it's a comfort to us as well, that even if we die now, it's not the end. We're with Jesus, and we await our bodily resurrection and the new earth when Jesus comes again. Well, in light of all that, let us sing together, even from our own homes.